In the depths of a war-torn region where hope seemed as distant as the stars, one woman's refusal to surrender would rewrite the rules of survival. When enemy forces surrounded her unit and capture seemed inevitable, Sarah Chen made a choice that would echo through military history. What happened next wasn't just about survival. It was about the kind of courage that transforms ordinary people into legends. This isn't a story about superhuman abilities or impossible feats. This is about a 28-year-old communications specialist who discovered that sometimes the greatest weapon you possess isn't training or equipment. It's the unbreakable will to protect those who depend on you. Her story begins in the mountains of Afghanistan, where a routine mission became a nightmare, and where one person's extraordinary decision would save dozens of lives and change everything we thought we knew about courage under fire. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains, as communications specialist Sarah Chen adjusted her radio equipment for the third time. The weight of her pack seemed heavier today, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the unusual silence from command, or the way Lieutenant Rodriguez kept checking his watch every few minutes. Something felt different about this mission. Sarah had been deployed for 8 months, long enough to recognize the subtle signs that separated routine operations from those that would test every ounce of training they possessed. Today's mission was supposed to be simple. Establish a communication relay point in the mountains to support ongoing operations in the valley below. Simple missions, however, had a way of becoming complicated in Afghanistan. The team consisted of 12 specialists, each selected for their expertise in mountain operations. Sarah was the only woman, a fact that had stopped bothering her months ago. Her skills with communication systems were unmatched, and her ability to maintain contact across the challenging terrain had already saved lives on previous missions. She had earned her place here through competence, not quotas. As they began their ascent, Sarah's mind wandered to the letter she had received from her younger brother the previous week. He was starting his freshman year at MIT, studying engineering. "I want to build things that help people," he had written. "Like what you're doing, but from behind a desk." Sarah smiled at the memory. If only he knew that most of her work involved troubleshooting temperamental radio equipment and coordinating supply drops. Not quite the heroic image he had in mind. The terrain grew more challenging as they climbed. Rocky outcroppings forced them to take longer routes, and the thin air reminded them constantly of their altitude. Sarah monitored the radio frequencies, maintaining contact with base while scanning for any unusual activity. The mountains had a way of playing tricks with radio signals, creating dead zones where communication became impossible. Today, she was determined to find the perfect spot that would give them clear contact with multiple units operating in the region. Lieutenant Rodriguez called for a rest break near a cluster of large boulders. Sarah used the opportunity to test her equipment again, fine-tuning the antenna array she had designed specifically for mountain operations. The modification wasn't standard issue, but her commander had approved it after seeing the improved range it provided. Innovation was encouraged when it saved lives. "Chen, what's our comm status?" Rodriguez asked, settling down beside her. "Strong signal to base intermittent contact with Alpha Team in the valley. Once we get another 1,000 feet up, I should have clear line of sight to everyone we need to reach," Sarah replied, not looking up from her adjustments. Rodriguez nodded. "Good. Intelligence suggests increased activity in this area. I want to make sure we can call for support if needed." The words sent a small chill through Sarah. Increased activity usually meant they weren't alone on this mountain. She had learned to trust her instincts over the months, and right now, those instincts were telling her to pay attention to everything around them. As they resumed climbing, Sarah noticed how quiet the mountain had become. Birds that had been calling earlier were silent now. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. In her experience, nature rarely went quiet without reason. She increased her vigilance, scanning the rocky terrain ahead for any sign of movement. Sergeant Williams, walking point, suddenly raised his fist, the signal to halt. Everyone froze, weapons ready. Sarah immediately began cycling through radio frequencies, listening for any chatter that might indicate hostile presence. The silence stretched for several minutes before Williams signaled them to continue. But the tension remained. They reached their planned position 2 hours later, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent views of the surrounding area and clear sightlines for radio communication. Sarah began setting up her equipment while the others established a defensive perimeter. This was the part of the job she loved most, creating order from chaos, connecting isolated units with the lifeline of reliable communication. As she worked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She had learned to trust these feelings. In an environment where threats could emerge from any direction, intuition often provided the first warning of danger. She mentioned her concerns to Rodriguez, who nodded grimly. "I feel it too," he admitted. Let's get this relay operational and get out of here. Sarah's hands moved quickly across her equipment, making the connections and adjustments that would turn this remote mountain position into a communication hub. Within 30 minutes, she had established clear contact with base, 3 field units, and 2 helicopter squadrons. The relay was functioning perfectly, but the feeling of unease continued to grow. It was then that Williams spotted the first signs of movement in the rocks below. At first, it looked like nothing more than shadows shifting in the afternoon light. But shadows didn't move with purpose, and these did. Rodriguez immediately ordered everyone to defensive positions, while Sarah began transmitting their situation to base. Base, this is Mountain Relay. We have possible hostile movement to our south. Request immediate intelligence on known enemy activity in this area. She spoke calmly into her microphone, though her heart rate was increasing. The response came quickly. Mountain Relay, be advised, intelligence indicates significant enemy presence in your area. Recommend immediate extraction. Rodriguez made the decision quickly. Pack it up, Chen. We're leaving. But as Sarah began disconnecting her equipment, the mountain erupted in gunfire. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, indicating careful planning and coordination. This wasn't a chance encounter. They had walked into an ambush. Sarah's training took over as she dropped behind her equipment, using the radio case as cover while continuing to transmit their position and situation to base. Base, Mountain Relay under heavy fire. We need immediate support. Coordinates follow. The sound of bullets striking rock filled the air, mixed with the sharp crack of return fire from her teammates. Sarah could hear Rodriguez shouting orders, coordinating their defense while calling for covering fire. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. As she transmitted their coordinates for the 3rd time, Sarah realized that her radio equipment wasn't just their lifeline. It was now the key to survival for everyone on the mountain. Without communication, rescue would be impossible. Without rescue, none of them would make it home. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders as she continued working, maintaining contact with base while bullets flew overhead. This wasn't the simple mission they had planned. This was a fight for survival, and everything depended on keeping those radio signals clear and strong. In the distance, she could hear the sound of helicopters approaching. Help was coming, but would they be able to hold their position long enough for rescue to arrive? Sarah gripped her microphone tighter and continued calling in updates, knowing that her voice might be the last thing base heard from their position. The mountain mission had become something else entirely, and Sarah Chen was about to discover just how much courage she possessed when everything depended on her remaining calm under fire. The helicopter rotors grew louder, but so did the gunfire. Sarah pressed herself against the rocky ground. Her radio equipment scattered around her as she tried to maintain communication while bullets whistled overhead. The ambush had been perfectly timed. Her team was exposed on the mountainside with limited cover and nowhere to retreat. Apache 1, this is Mountain Relay. Sarah spoke urgently into her microphone. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. I'm marking our location with infrared strobe. Through her earpiece, she heard the pilot's voice. Mountain Relay, we see your strobe. Enemy positions identified. Keep your heads down. The sound of the Apache helicopter's cannon filled the air as it engaged the enemy positions. For a moment, Sarah felt a surge of relief. Help had arrived, but the feeling was short-lived as she heard Rodriguez cry out from somewhere to her left. Medic! Rodriguez is down, Sergeant Williams called out. Sarah's stomach dropped. Rodriguez wasn't just their leader. He was the one with the extraction coordinates and emergency protocols. Without him, their options for getting off this mountain had just become severely limited. She low-crawled toward Rodriguez's position, dragging her portable radio with her. The lieutenant was conscious, but bleeding heavily from his leg. His face was pale, and his breathing was labored. Chen, he gasped as she reached him. You need to take over communications. Get everyone off this mountain. Sir, the medic is... No time, Rodriguez interrupted, gripping her arm. You're the only one who can coordinate with air support and base. The lives of everyone here depend on keeping those radios working. Sarah looked around at their scattered team. 3 men were pinned down behind rocks to her right, while Williams and 2 others were trying to provide covering fire from another position. The Apache helicopter continued its attack runs, but new enemy positions kept appearing. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Base, this is Mountain Relay, she transmitted, keeping her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Our team leader is wounded. I'm assuming communication control. We need immediate medical evacuation for 1 critical and extraction for all personnel. The response came through heavy static. Mountain Relay, medical evacuation, is standing by, but landing zone is too hot. You need to clear enemy positions before we can get birds on the ground. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, processing the situation. The Apache was running low on ammunition. She could tell by the decreasing frequency of its cannon fire. Once it departed for refueling and rearming, they would be alone again with an unknown number of enemy fighters who knew the terrain better than they did. Apache 1, what's your ammunition status? She asked. Mountain relay, we're down to maybe 2 more gun runs before we need to RTB. Suggest you find a more defensible position. Sarah looked around desperately. Above them, the mountain became steeper and more rocky. Possibly better cover but also harder to reach while under fire. Below them, the terrain opened up, offering no protection but easier movement. Neither option was good. It was then that she noticed something the others had missed. About 50 meters to their north, there was what appeared to be a cave entrance, partially hidden behind fallen rocks. It was barely visible from their current position, which meant the enemy might not have spotted it either. Williams, she called out. Cave entrance 50 meters north behind the rockfall. Can you see it? Williams raised his head carefully, scanning the area. I see it. Might be big enough for all of us. Rodriguez, Sarah said, turning back to the wounded lieutenant. Can you move? I can move, he replied through gritted teeth. But I'll slow everyone down. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. We're going to that cave. I'll coordinate the movement while maintaining comm with air support. Williams, take 3 men and secure the cave entrance. I'll bring Rodriguez and provide communication support. What she didn't tell anyone was that she had noticed something else about their position. Her radio equipment was set up in a location that provided excellent line of sight to multiple frequencies. If they abandoned this position, they might lose communication capabilities entirely. But if someone stayed behind to maintain the relay, negative Chen, Williams responded. We all move together, or nobody moves. Sarah looked at Rodriguez, who seemed to understand what she was thinking. Chen, don't even consider it, he said weakly. But Sarah was already calculating ranges and frequencies in her head. The portable radio would work from the cave, but with reduced range and reliability. The main relay equipment, however, could coordinate not just their rescue, but potentially save other units operating in the area. 3 teams were counting on this communication relay for their own missions. Apache 1, this is Mountain Relay, she transmitted. I need you to suppress enemy positions to our south while my team moves to alternate position. Roger, Mountain Relay. Suppressing now. The helicopter's cannon fire erupted again, directed at the enemy positions that had been harassing them. Sarah used the noise and confusion to move her equipment, quickly disconnecting the main array while keeping the portable units functional. Williams, start moving your team toward the cave. Take Rodriguez with you, she ordered. What about you? Williams called back. I'm right behind you, Sarah lied. She watched as Williams and 2 others carefully lifted Rodriguez and began moving toward the cave, using the covering fire from the remaining team members. Sarah continued coordinating with the Apache, directing its fire to keep enemy heads down while her teammates moved. When the last of her team had reached the cave entrance, Sarah made her choice. She stayed with the main radio equipment, knowing that maintaining communications was more important than her own safety. Someone had to coordinate the rescue operations for multiple teams, and she was the only one with the skills to do it. Base, this is Mountain Relay. She transmitted from her exposed position. My team has reached temporary cover, but I'm maintaining primary communications from original position. Request immediate support for multiple units in this area. The response was immediate. Mountain Relay, you need to move to covered position immediately. Negative, base. Communication relay is too important. Multiple teams are counting on this position for coordination. I can maintain position and continue operations. Sarah looked toward the cave where her teammates had taken cover. She could see Williams at the entrance, frantically signaling for her to move. But she also knew that without the main communications array, rescue operations would be severely compromised. The Apache pilot's voice crackled through her earpiece.
Mountain Relay, we're down to our last gun run before RTB.
After that, you'll be on your own until reinforcements arrive. Sarah checked her ammunition and looked at the radio equipment around her. She had made her choice. Now she had to make it count. Apache 1, after your final run, I'll continue coordination from this position. Make sure medical evacuation knows Lieutenant Rodriguez needs immediate attention when you get them airborne. Roger, Mountain Relay. You sure about this? Sarah took a deep breath, watching the enemy movement in the rocks below. Affirmative. Someone has to maintain communications, might as well be me. As the Apache made its final attack run before departing for fuel and ammunition, Sarah Chen prepared herself for what was coming next. She was alone on a mountainside with enemy fighters closing in. But she had the most important job of all, keeping the lifelines open for everyone who needed help. The real test of her courage was just beginning. The sound of the Apache helicopter faded into the distance, leaving Sarah alone with her radio equipment and the growing silence of the mountain. She could hear movement in the rocks below. Careful, deliberate movement of people who knew she was there and were planning their approach. From the cave 50 meters away, she could hear Williams calling her name, but she couldn't risk responding and revealing her exact position. Instead, she continued working with her radio equipment, using hand signals to let her team know she was still alive and operational. "Base, this is Mountain Relay," she whispered into a microphone. "Apache 1 has departed for refuel. I'm maintaining communications from primary position. Current situation: 1 team member critical condition in temporary cover. 11 personnel requiring immediate extraction. Mountain Relay, we have fast movers inbound to your position, ETA 15 minutes. Can you maintain position until then?" Sarah looked around at her scattered equipment and the advancing enemy positions. 15 minutes seemed like an eternity. "Affirmative, Base. We'll maintain communications." What she didn't tell Base was that she could see at least 6 enemy fighters working their way up the mountainside toward her position. They were moving carefully, using the terrain to mask their approach. But Sarah had spent months learning to read the mountain's signs. Every shifted stone, every unnatural shadow told her where they were. She began quickly reconfiguring her radio equipment, setting up what her training called a dead man's relay, a system that would continue broadcasting even if she couldn't actively operate it. If something happened to her, the other teams depending on this communication hub would still have a chance. As she worked, Sarah thought about the letter from her brother that she carried in her pocket. He had written about wanting to help people through engineering, building things that made a difference. Right now, she was using her own engineering skills to build something that would save lives. A communication network that could coordinate rescue operations across multiple locations. The first enemy fighter appeared between the rocks about 30 meters below her position. Sarah froze, her hand on her weapon, but realized that engaging him would reveal her location to all the others. Instead, she slowly reached for her radio, preparing to call in the exact enemy positions to the incoming air support. "Base, this is Mountain Relay," she whispered, barely breathing into the microphone. "I have visual on 6 enemy fighters, coordinates as follows." She carefully transmitted the location data, knowing that the incoming aircraft would need precise information to effectively engage without endangering her own position. As she spoke, she watched the enemy fighters continue their advance, unaware that their positions were being relayed to fast-approaching military aircraft. From the cave, she could see Williams had set up a defensive position at the entrance. He was smart enough to know that trying to rescue her now would only get more people killed. Rodriguez appeared to be receiving medical attention from one of the other team members, a good sign that he was still alive. The enemy fighters were getting closer. Sarah could hear them communicating in low voices, coordinating their approach. They knew someone was operating the radio equipment, but they hadn't pinpointed her exact location yet. The scattered equipment and antenna arrays were designed to make source location difficult, a feature that was now saving her life. Mountain Relay. Fast movers are 5 minutes out. Can you mark enemy positions with infrared designator? Sarah carefully pulled out her infrared marker, a device that would paint the enemy positions for the incoming aircraft. But using it would definitely reveal her location to anyone in the area. She would have one chance to mark all the targets before she had to move or defend herself. "Base, marking targets now," she whispered. Sarah raised the designator and began painting the enemy positions, moving quickly from one fighter to the next. She could see them clearly now. 6 men with automatic weapons, moving in a coordinated pattern up the mountainside. As she marked the last position, one of them spotted the infrared beam's origin point and shouted to the others. Suddenly, gunfire erupted around her position. Sarah dropped behind her equipment as bullets sparked off the rocks around her. She keyed her radio one more time. "Base, targets marked. Taking fire at this position." The response came immediately. "Mountain Relay, fast movers engaging marked targets. Keep your head down." Sarah pressed herself against the rocky ground as the sound of jet aircraft filled the air. The precision strike was unlike anything she had experienced. The ground shook as explosives found their targets with devastating accuracy. When the dust settled, the mountainside had fallen silent again. Mountain Relay, targets eliminated. Medical evacuation is inbound to your position. Sarah slowly raised her head, scanning the area where the enemy fighters had been. The precision strike had been perfect. No movement, no return fire. She was alive, her equipment was still functional, and help was finally coming. "Williams!" she called out toward the cave. "Medical evacuation inbound. Get Rodriguez ready to move." As she began packing her equipment, Sarah reflected on what had just happened. She had maintained communications for multiple units, coordinated precision airstrikes, and kept her wounded team leader alive long enough for medical help to arrive. It wasn't the heroic combat story that movies portrayed, but it was something more important, the kind of courage that came from doing your job perfectly when everything depended on it. The sound of helicopters grew louder as the medical evacuation team approached. Sarah continued transmitting coordinates and conditions to ensure they could land safely and quickly. Rodriguez needed immediate medical attention, and the rest of the team needed extraction before more enemy forces could respond to the area. "Base, this is Mountain Relay," she transmitted with satisfaction. "Landing zone is clear, patient is ready for transport, and all personnel are accounted for." As the helicopters touched down and medics rushed toward the cave to help Rodriguez, Sarah finished securing her equipment. The mission that had started as a simple communication relay had become something much more significant. She had proven that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't about fighting the enemy. It was about staying calm and doing your job when lives depended on your competence. But Sarah's story was far from over. As she prepared to board the extraction helicopter, she received a new transmission that would change everything once again. "Mountain Relay, we have a situation developing in the valley below. Multiple units are under attack and have lost communications. Can you maintain relay operations from new position?" Sarah looked at her equipment, then at her exhausted teammates boarding the helicopter. Rodriguez was stable but needed immediate hospital care. The logical choice was to extract with her team and let someone else handle the valley situation. Instead, she made the decision that would define her legacy. "Base, this is Mountain Relay. Send my team for medical evacuation. I'll relocate to support valley operations." Williams stared at her from the helicopter doorway. "Chen, what are you doing?" "My job," Sarah replied simply, shouldering her radio pack once again. The test of courage wasn't over. It was just beginning. The helicopter carrying Rodriguez and the rest of her team disappeared over the ridge, leaving Sarah alone on the mountain with her radio equipment and a new mission that would test every skill she had developed over 8 months of deployment. Below in the valley, 3 separate units were under attack and had lost communication capabilities. Without coordination, they couldn't call for support or coordinate their movements. They were fighting blind. Sarah quickly surveyed her options. The mountaintop position gave her excellent line of sight to the valley, but it also made her visible to anyone looking up from below. She needed to find a position that offered both concealment and clear radio transmission capabilities. About 200 meters down the slope, she spotted a cluster of large boulders that might provide both protection and the elevated position she needed. "Base, this is Mountain Relay relocating to support valley operations," she transmitted while beginning her descent. "We'll establish new position and attempt contact with Bravo, Charlie, and Delta teams." The response came quickly. "Mountain Relay, be advised all 3 teams have been out of contact for over 20 minutes. Last known positions transmitted to your location." Sarah studied the coordinates as she moved carefully down the mountainside. The 3 teams were spread across the valley floor, each engaged with enemy forces but unable to communicate with each other or base. Without coordination, they couldn't provide mutual support or call for effective airstrikes. They were fighting 3 separate battles instead of one coordinated operation. As she reached the boulder cluster, Sarah began setting up her equipment with practiced efficiency. The location provided good cover from below, while maintaining clear sight lines to the valley and surrounding ridges. Within 10 minutes, she had established a functional communication hub and began scanning frequencies for any sign of the missing teams. Bravo team, this is Mountain Relay. Respond on any frequency." She transmitted across multiple channels. Static filled her earpiece for several seconds before a weak voice came through. "Mountain Relay, this is Bravo 6. Thank God someone's out there. We're taking heavy fire and running low on ammunition. Can't raise base or anyone else." Sarah's heart lifted. Contact with one team meant her equipment was working. "Bravo 6, I have you weak but readable. What's your current position and status?" "Mountain Relay, we're pinned down in a compound about 2 clicks north of Checkpoint Alpha. 6 personnel, 2 wounded, requesting immediate support." Sarah quickly plotted their position on her map while continuing to scan for the other teams. "Bravo 6, I'm establishing communications relay for all valley operations. Stand by for coordination with other units and air support." She switched frequencies and tried again. Charlie Team, Delta Team, this is Mountain Relay on emergency frequency. Respond if you can hear this transmission. This time, two voices came through almost simultaneously. Mountain Relay, this is Charlie 4. We're trapped in a village about 3 clicks east of our last known position. Heavy enemy presence, need immediate extraction. Mountain Relay, Delta 2 here. We're in buildings near the river, under attack from multiple directions. Lost 2 men already. Sarah now had contact with all 3 teams, but the situation was worse than she had imagined. Each unit was under heavy attack, separated from the others, and running out of time. Without immediate coordination, all 3 teams could be overrun before help could arrive. Base, this is Mountain Relay. She transmitted on the command frequency. I have established contact with all Valley teams. Situation is critical across all positions. Request immediate air support and coordination for multiple simultaneous extractions.
Mountain Relay, we have close air support en route, ETA 10 minutes.
Can you coordinate ground teams for extraction? Sarah looked at her map, studying the positions of all 3 teams. They were spread across several kilometers of hostile territory, each facing overwhelming odds. Traditional extraction would require multiple helicopter flights, giving the enemy time to reinforce and potentially shoot down the aircraft. Then she noticed something that made her heart race. The 3 team positions formed a triangle, and there was a large clearing in the center that could serve as a landing zone. If she could coordinate the teams to move toward that central position, they could be extracted together. But it would require precise timing and coordinated movement across hostile territory. Bravo 6, Charlie 4, Delta 2, this is Mountain Relay. I'm going to coordinate a simultaneous movement to central extraction point. Are you able to move under fire? The responses came back quickly. Bravo 6, we can move, but our wounded will slow us down. Charlie 4, we're mobile but taking fire from multiple positions. Delta 2, we can move but need covering fire. Sarah studied the terrain again, then made the decision that would either save all 3 teams or get them all killed. All teams, listen carefully. I'm going to coordinate airstrikes on enemy positions to create a corridor for your movement. When I give the word, you'll have approximately 8 minutes to reach the central extraction point before enemy reinforcements arrive. She switched to the air support frequency. Viper Flight, this is Mountain Relay. I need precision strikes on multiple enemy positions to create extraction corridor for ground teams. Mountain Relay, Viper Flight standing by for target coordinates. Sarah began the most complex coordination task of her military career. Using her map and the position reports from each team, she calculated the enemy locations that posed the greatest threat to their movement. Then she had to time the airstrike so that all 3 teams could move simultaneously without interfering with each other or the aircraft. Viper Flight, multiple targets, time on target will be coordinated. First targets are enemy positions threatening Bravo team movement. For the next several minutes, Sarah became the central nervous system for the entire operation. She directed airstrikes, coordinated team movements, and maintained contact with base while tracking the progress of all 3 units as they fought their way toward the extraction point. Bravo 6, move now. Charlie 4, wait 30 seconds, then begin movement. Delta 2, you're clear to move in 60 seconds. Sarah watched through her binoculars as explosions erupted across the valley floor. The airstrikes were hitting their targets, creating gaps in the enemy positions that the teams could exploit. But timing was everything. If any team moved too early or too late, the coordination would fail. Bravo 6, you're halfway to extraction point. Charlie 4, begin movement now. Delta 2, stand by. Through her radio, Sarah could hear the sounds of gunfire and explosions as the teams fought their way across the valley. Each team leader provided constant updates on their progress while she coordinated additional air support to keep the corridor clear. Delta 2, begin movement now. All teams' extraction helicopters are 3 minutes out. Sarah's hands moved constantly across her radio controls, switching frequencies to coordinate with air support, ground teams, and incoming helicopters. She had become the single point of control for an operation involving dozens of personnel and millions of dollars of military equipment. Mountain Relay, this is extraction flight. We see smoke marking the landing zone. Are all teams in position? Sarah checked her status board. Extraction flight, Bravo team is at landing zone. Charlie team is 30 seconds out. Delta team is 60 seconds out. Landing zone is clear of enemy fire. As she watched the first helicopter touch down in the valley clearing, Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief. The coordination had worked. 3 teams that had been trapped and isolated were now being extracted safely because someone had maintained the communication links that made coordination possible. But her job wasn't finished yet. As the last helicopter lifted off with the rescue teams, Sarah received a new transmission that would present her with the greatest challenge yet. Mountain relay, we have intelligence indicating massive enemy movement toward your position. Multiple units converging on your location. You need immediate extraction. Sarah looked around at her equipment and then at the valley below where the successful rescue operation had just concluded. She had saved 3 teams, but now she was the one who needed saving. The question was, would anyone be left to coordinate her own rescue? Sarah stared at her radio equipment as the reality of her situation settled in. She had successfully coordinated the rescue of 3 teams, 15 lives saved through precise communication and coordination. But now, enemy forces were converging on her position from multiple directions, drawn by the radio transmissions that had made those rescues possible. "Base, this is Mountain Relay," she transmitted, keeping her voice steady despite the approaching danger. "Request immediate extraction from current position. How many personnel available for rescue operation?" The pause before the response told her everything she needed to know. "Mountain Relay. All available aircraft are committed to medical evacuation and resupply operations. Earliest possible extraction window is 90 minutes. Sarah looked through her binoculars at the mountainside below. She could see movement in at least 4 different locations, enemy fighters working their way up toward her position. 90 minutes was an impossibly long time. She would be overrun long before help could arrive. "Base, I may not be able to maintain position for 90 minutes. Enemy forces are approaching from multiple directions. Mountain Relay, can you relocate to alternate position?" Sarah studied her tactical map. There were other locations on the mountain that might offer better defensive positions, but moving her equipment would mean temporarily losing communication capabilities. During that time, other operations in the region would be without coordination support.
3 more teams were operating within her communication range, depending on her relay for their own safety.
As she considered her options, Sarah's radio crackled with a transmission from one of those teams. "Mountain Relay, this is Echo Team."
"We're engaged with enemy forces and need immediate air support. Can you coordinate?" Sarah's stomach dropped. Echo Team was in trouble, and they were counting on her for support. If she abandoned her position to save herself, Echo Team might be overrun, but if she stayed to help them, she would almost certainly be captured or killed by the forces approaching her own position. "Echo Team, this is Mountain Relay. I copy your request for air support. Stand by for coordination." As she began working with Echo Team's situation, Sarah realized that her choice had already been made. She was a communication specialist, and her job was to keep the lines of communication open for everyone who needed them, even if it meant sacrificing her own safety. "Base, this is Mountain Relay. I'm coordinating air support for Echo Team. We'll maintain position until support operations are complete. Mountain Relay, you need to consider your own extraction. We cannot afford to lose you." Sarah smiled grimly as she worked her radios. "Base, I'm not lost yet." "And Echo Team needs help now." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah conducted one of the most complex communication operations of her career, while enemy fighters closed in on her position. She coordinated airstrikes for Echo Team, directed medical evacuation helicopters to a separate location, and maintained communication links for 2 other teams operating in the region. Through her binoculars, she could see the enemy fighters were now less than 50 meters from her position. They were moving carefully, knowing that she was armed and in a defensive position. But they also knew they had overwhelming numbers and time on their side. "Echo Team, air support is inbound. Mark your position with infrared strobe and take cover." As she coordinated the airstrike for Echo Team, Sarah heard voices calling to her in a language she didn't understand. The enemy fighters had reached her perimeter. They knew exactly where she was and were demanding her surrender. Sarah keyed her radio one more time. "Base, this is Mountain Relay. Enemy forces have reached my position. I'm going to destroy my equipment to prevent capture of sensitive communications gear. Mountain Relay, wait for extraction." But Sarah had already made her decision. She pulled the thermite grenades from her pack, standard equipment for communication specialists to prevent enemy capture of sensitive radio equipment. But instead of destroying her gear immediately, she had a different idea. "Base, I'm going to try something. Keep extraction standing by." Sarah set her main radio to broadcast on all emergency frequencies, then activated the speaker system she used for coordinating with aircraft. Instead of destroying her equipment, she was going to use it as a psychological weapon. "Attention enemy forces," she announced through her speakers, her voice echoing across the mountainside. "This position is surrounded by American forces. You are being observed by aircraft overhead. Withdraw immediately or face destruction." The bluff was audacious and completely against protocol. But Sarah hoped that the confusion might buy her enough time for real help to arrive. She could hear the enemy fighters talking among themselves, clearly uncertain about what they were hearing. To add to the confusion, Sarah began broadcasting fake radio traffic, using different voices and accents to simulate multiple American units in the area. Her training in communications had taught her to mimic radio protocols perfectly, and now she used that skill to create the illusion of a major military operation surrounding the mountain. Bravo Company, this is command. Enemy forces are surrounded. Begin encirclement maneuver. Roger, command. Moving into position now. Sarah provided both sides of the fake conversation, switching between microphones to create the illusion of multiple units. Through her binoculars, she could see the enemy fighters had stopped advancing and appeared to be arguing among themselves. The deception worked for almost 20 minutes before the enemy fighters realized what was happening. But 20 minutes was enough. The sound of helicopters filled the air as a real extraction team finally arrived, guided by Sarah's precise coordinate transmissions. Mountain Relay, this is Rescue 6. We're 30 seconds from your position. Mark your location and prepare for extraction under fire. Sarah activated her infrared strobe and prepared to abandon her equipment. As the rescue helicopter approached, enemy gunfire erupted from multiple positions. The extraction would be under heavy fire, but it was her only chance. Rescue 6, I'm the only American at this position. Everyone else you see is hostile. The helicopter's door gunners immediately engaged the enemy positions as the aircraft touched down just long enough for Sarah to dive aboard. As they lifted off, she looked back at her communication equipment, now being destroyed by enemy fire. Base, this is Mountain Relay, she transmitted from the helicopter's radio. Extraction successful. All communication equipment destroyed to prevent enemy capture. As the helicopter flew towards safety, Sarah thought about the operations she had coordinated from that mountainside. 4 teams rescued, dozens of lives saved, multiple airstrikes coordinated, and sensitive communications equipment kept out of enemy hands. It had been the longest day of her military career, but also the most important. 3 months later, Sarah Chen stood in a ceremony room at military headquarters, listening as her commanding officer read the citation for her Silver Star Medal. The words described her actions on the mountain, but they couldn't capture what the experience had really meant. It wasn't about individual heroism or dramatic combat. It was about understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply stay at your post and do your job perfectly when everything depends on it. Sarah had discovered that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to keep working when fear was trying to make you quit. After the ceremony, Sarah's younger brother approached her, wearing his ROTC uniform from MIT. I read about what you did, he said quietly. I understand now why you chose this. Sarah smiled, thinking about all the people who had made it home safely because someone had maintained the communication links they needed. It's not about choosing to be a hero, she told him. It's about choosing to be reliable when people are counting on you. As they walked out of the ceremony together, Sarah reflected on how the mountain mission had changed her understanding of courage. The real heroes weren't always the ones who charged into battle. Sometimes they were the ones who stayed calm under pressure and made sure everyone else could do their jobs effectively. Her story had become part of military communications training, teaching future specialists about the importance of maintaining contact under the most difficult circumstances. But for Sarah, it would always be simpler than that. It was about a day when she had chosen to do her job perfectly, and that choice had made all the difference. The mountain had tested her courage, but it had also revealed something more important. The quiet strength that comes from knowing your skills can save lives when everything else fails. That knowledge would guide her through the rest of her military career and beyond, a reminder that true courage often looks like simply refusing to quit when others are counting on you.